So our next speaker, Tom Hearn, calls himself a reforming hospital administrator, is that right? With 25 years administrative experience in healthcare, the managing principal at Novarus Healthcare, which is a North Carolina tech company specialized in providing new technologies to our industry. He is previously a senior vice president for Novant Health, a $3 billion health system, and he has gotten his master's in public health as well as his MBA from the University of Alabama. Tom?
First of all, you never want to follow the marketing guy. I mean, that was a great job, David, and definitely what you want to do right after lunch. But hopefully, what I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about some specific examples of how we're trying to transform some industries, and I hold out that I'm not an expert in clinical research, so I view you all as the content experts here, although I will say I invested $2 million of one of my former company's money into trying to set up an SMO, so I understand the challenges of the business, but appreciate the opportunity to come here and spend a few minutes with you.
Hi, Tom. Can I interrupt you for
Sure.
1 minute? Any judges need to go to their rooms now because we're going to have the next contestant at 1:10. So we want you to get in there and get settled. Thank you. Sorry.
So what I'd like to do today is to have each of you have one takeaway, which is I'm going to take you through a little bit of what I call a reimagination exercise. To think about one idea that could transform what you do on a daily basis. And when I first started doing this a couple of years ago, I would have a lot of clinical people and other folks that I'd worked with for a long time say, this stuff that you're doing with apps or whatever, can you give me some examples of how you're trying to solve a problem or what the pain is? So I've always found in doing these types of presentations to give a couple of people of here's a problem, here's a potential solution, and it tends to spur a little bit of thought on the part of the audience about what might transform their business a little bit. So a little bit about us. We started in 2011 and we developed what I call service-based technology solutions to try to make healthcare better, cheaper, and faster. Most of the work that we're doing is much more kind of operationally focused. I'd love to wrap around some of David's, marketing ideas, and as part of the reimagination slides I'm going to sort of take you through. Coming out of big healthcare, everything in big healthcare is complicated and it is expensive. And so what we're really trying to do is to find pieces of technology or solutions that operate outside of the Epic world. Everybody familiar with Epic? Everybody know what I'm talking about? If somebody tells me I need to play with Epic, I'm on the next train to the next city. It's big data at its finest. But one of the things we really like about the clinical research business is this is a heavily fragmented business. There are lots of different parts to it, which means that there's a lot of opportunity to provide value at the various stages of the process. We are also part of a about to be announced and launched $30 million North Carolina-based venture capital firm, venture capital fund. And our role as part of that will be to identify new and promising ideas. As part of that, to take those tools through a discovery process to hopefully find 4 or 5 ideas over the life of the fund that the fund could invest in. So a little bit of high-level healthcare, $2.9 trillion. Talked a little bit about Obamacare. I usually just say ACA in the slides because it's less controversial than saying, Obamacare. But as many of you know, in businesses that are in chaos, there's a lot of opportunity. There's going to be a whole other set of winners and losers who figure out how to play in this space and to be successful. We really like the role that employers are going to play in healthcare reform on a go-forward basis. Still the single largest payer of healthcare in this country. And the emphasis that's, every health system is now talking about value-based reimbursement, value-based outcomes. Still waiting to see a lot of tangible benefits from that, but it certainly is making it into their marketing messages. So depending on what seat you're sitting in, it's the best of times in healthcare or it's the worst of times. This is sort of how I think about the critical path of clinical research. And this is not all inclusive, and I'm sure there's some steps that get left out, but someone has an idea for a new drug or device, they need to go and set up a network of sites and investigators to sort of run the trials, to put in place a process for enrollment, and then sort of actually running the trials. Obtaining the patient enrollment quickly. I'd not heard the statistic about 86% don't finish on time, but time is certainly money in this business. And then at the same time, everyone's got a return on investment that they have to deliver on. It may be the study sponsor, it may be an SMO, it may be one of your investigators. So there's a lot of different business constituents that play a role in this. This is a piece of research that came out a couple of years ago from the research firm Kleiner Perkins, but I really like it, so I use it a lot. Some of the data may be a little bit old as we go through, but they described this evolution that's going on with technology as the reimagination of nearly everything. And sort of the coming together of new devices and the iPhones, along with connectivity, user interface, beauty, and I'm sure there's now new adjectives that they've put into this process. But what I'm going to ask you to think about as you're going through, what you spend time doing during your normal workday and where the big opportunities are, what really would be the possibility for finding some new technology or developing new technology to find patients for your trials. Epic has announced that they're going to open an app marketplace, and with so many of the big institutions in the U.S. moving to Epic, I think there's going to be a lot of activity of people developing tools to try to go in and data mine for clinical research applications. The information that's in Epic, sort of putting aside HIPAA, putting aside all the privacy issues that would have to be considered. It's going to be a really interesting opportunity. How can you utilize or develop new tools for educating, managing, retaining investigators? Once again, if I could overlay a lot of David's data onto this slide, it could really become powerful. But all of the new tools that are now available for doing that are many of them are already out there. It's just the utilization of those tools to change the messaging. And then the whole issue of how can technology influence how patients shop for treatment options, including trials. And the data about changing the purchaser and the seller are really fascinating. And one of the slides that I did not put in here was that the only industry that lags healthcare in the utilization of handheld devices is the oil refinery business. So it tells you how big an opportunity we really have to use many of these new tools to do things differently. And then what I really love, particularly with all the folks who have invested $1 billion in Epic, is how many folks still are completing paper. So in many of your trials, just by a show of hands, how is paper still a daily part of what you all do? I mean, I've never been in front of a healthcare group and said, all right, who's totally paperless? Oh, by the way, I'm a new patient. Here's your clipboard. I mean, it's truly fascinating. And, relative to the, I guess these are the old case report form books. that when I was involved in the SMO business, just trying to figure out how to create a case report form that multiple study sponsors would take was sort of beyond our capability. Maybe the industry's sort of solved that issue now. And then the whole opportunity around patient education, investigator education, sort of the compliance issues, what I always found interesting about this business is, once you had a study start, those of us on sort of the healthcare operations side will say, what's our run rate? And then all of a sudden a study would stop for 2 months because there had been a bad outcome. And everything would stop. And of course, we don't know how to deal with that in healthcare operations. We need the nice steady lines. But there's so many nuances in this business that I think technology can be a part of assisting with the solution for. So what I want to transition to is talking about a couple of real life products that we have and that we've built, and we did not build them for the clinical research space, but they're good opportunities to describe, here was a problem. It was a problem that may or may not be pertinent to clinical research, but I thought it would be a good sort of benchmark. And this is a company a product that we're developing called BERT, which is an acronym for Benefits Reconciliation Tool, that we're building for employers. And the business opportunity is, and unless you work in human resources, almost no one's going to know that this is a common problem and that it's a multi-million, if not billion-dollar problem for companies all over the country. But your company will have health insurance that they buy from Blue Cross, and they'll have dental insurance that they buy from another vendor, and then they'll have long-term disability and short-term disability and a whole host of benefit plans. And once a month, those vendors send a bill into the company. And healthcare, for example, runs about 20% turnover a year. So some person in HR is usually just taking that bill and paying it. And nobody's reconciling the bill to say, do we have the right number of employees on this bill? Most of the bills are due upon demand, so you don't have 2 weeks to put them through a investigative process. At the same time, many of you all know about dependent audits and what's involved in that, where the employers are going to make sure that you don't have a 35-year-old child in your home that you're still keeping on your insurance plan because now you can only stay on until you're 26. Or I'm divorced, but I'm going to keep my wife on the plan because it's a cheaper way for her. A whole bunch of issues that HR folks and companies have to deal with. So the question becomes, this is what the system does. We're going to take a bunch of data out of the company's HR system, and then we're going to take all of these invoices from these various vendors, and we're going to put them into this benefits reconciliation tool, and we're going to create reporting. And the reason we like this, it's a nice defined problem. Not a lot of people know about it, so we've got to figure out a way to make it real and relevant to a lot of folks. But at the same time, our doing some beta testing on this, one with a small hospital in North Carolina with 750 employees, we found $150,000 for them in about 60 days. So real life problem. For a small hospital, $150,000 is a lot of money. And so the question then becomes, does something like this exist with the payment of clinical research bills to hospitals or to other study sponsors? Is that same reconciliation issue a problem or not a problem? And I don't know, but it's an issue of trying to take other technologies and apply them to different problems in different businesses. Does that make sense? The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is another tool that we've developed that's called Nevarez Employee Connect. And Jennifer had to leave, but she said it was okay if I talk about this because we're doing some work with PMG on this product. But one of the huge dissatisfiers for employees is benefits are complicated and they're difficult to know how to access. So I would project that most of you, if you wanted to look up your a claim status on Blue Cross, you would go to the Blue Cross portal and you would sign in. And you might have a different portal for your dental insurer, and you might have a different portal for if you have an HSA and a high deductible health plan like I do. So I've got to pay Blue Cross $5,400 before I have any insurance, so I always want to know what my deductible level is. So we went through a process and identified that the average company probably has 10 or 15 different portals that employees have to go to, and it's a dissatisfier, and at the same time the company has a hard time knowing what the utilization of these benefits and features is. So we had developed another tool called Nevarez Patient Connect, which was a way to connect providers to patient populations, and several providers said to us, that's interesting, but we want you to do this for our employees because we want to have basically an application on a handheld unit, and I'm going to sort of skip ahead a little bit. Well, Jennifer, I was just starting to talk about you. That basically said, I want to have one tool that'll be on an app for my employees that will help them view their paycheck, access all of these various portals, but more important than that, this is a first phase, and the next phase, in the case of PMG, that they've said is, we really want a way, since all of our study coordinators and teams are dispersed, to let them have access to critical information, to be able to track their enrollments in different studies, but also to do project management. So once again, an interesting sort of application that was developed for another use that we're now finding a lot of interest in the internal space, and we've had another healthcare client who came to us and said, well, our real big issue is training. We want you to build an online training module so that the training could be delivered by a handheld. But you know, I have to have a secure Excel file on my computer just to remember all of my passwords and usernames. So what we're really trying to do is to find very simple products that solve a critical problem that we could implement quickly, and to use that as a vehicle to say, well, what else could we do to make this, you know, more viable? Some of these are obviously not going to turn into big companies, but the dialogue about what we're doing with them, we're very bullish that it might help us. So, you know, once again, the ROI in essence on the BERT project that I talked to you about, the hospital paid us $10,000 and we found them $150,000, so 10x return. We're in the early stages about to deploy this for PMG, and they're still helping us decide what they want to have in the application. But the real issue is getting at productivity, employee engagement, and, you know, what can we do to have a team, you know, pull together that's dispersed. So in summary, my real question is always, you know, this appears to be a very fragmented market. There seems to be lots of opportunities to develop tools to make clinical research better, quicker, and faster. Our real goal is not to develop the new piece of software that's going to automate every case report form, but to find smaller pieces of this pie that we could develop solutions for that make sense for people.